Hi everybody, welcome to Colorado Inside Out. I'm your host Dominic Dezzutti. Thank you very much for joining us. Let's get a quick take on Boulder County issuing marriage licenses to gay couples this week based on the landmark same-sex marriage ruling in Utah. State Attorney General John Suthers stated that the marriages will remain invalid under Colorado's current ban. Lynn Barles from the Denver Post, Boulder has made this move before where they, even if there's Colorado law against it based on something else, but because of the momentum this is having nationally, do you think there's a chance that these licenses may become valid a few months from now, or was this just folly from Boulder's part?
Well, first of all, happy birthday.
Oh, thank you very much.
And then secondly, we still have something specific in our Constitution that defines marriage as between a man and woman only. And I know nothing about law, but I mean, don't we have to deal with our Constitution? Doesn't somebody have to come in and deal with our Constitution? Or can we make their ruling apply to ours? And we have an Attorney General who says, this is what Colorado voters have said, and I have to honor that.
David Kopel from DU Law School and Independence Institute, you are our legal expert at the table. What do you make of what happened in Boulder?
Well, the ruling by the 10th Circuit, of course, applies to all the states in the 10th Circuit, including Colorado. However, the 10th Circuit issued a stay on its opinion. The Boulder attorney came up with a very creative, and I don't think plausible, interpretation that, the stay only applies to the defendants in Utah, and it doesn't count for us. I think it's as you said, Boulder County issued gay marriage licenses back in 1975, and that didn't hold up either. Now, there is a good chance the case will eventually go to the U.S. Supreme Court. If the U.S. Supreme Court agrees with the 10th Circuit, then I don't think anybody's going to go back and retroactively say, your June or July Boulder license is invalid and you got to do it over again.
Gotcha. Eric Sonderman, political analyst. Is this just another way that Boulder must really have a great PR system because they find their way to get in the news quite often? Is this basically what this is?
Well, they have their own foreign policy in Boulder, so I don't know why they shouldn't have their own, policy on domestic issues as well. It's probably more symbolic than real in the short term, but underscore short term. Over the long term, and the long term is probably not that long, this is inevitable, whether that's 3 years down the road or 5 or 10. I think the debate is really about how long that is in single-digit years probably. And whether it happens through a U.S. Supreme Court ruling or whether it happens at the ballot box, as we're increasingly seeing, public opinion is changing so quickly. I was with recently a small group of young evangelicals, and they're 5-10 years ago they would have been totally on the other side of this issue. They're not there anymore. Public opinion is changing. Judicial and political opinion will follow public opinion.
And Susan Green, editor of the Colorado Independent, what do you make of Boulder's move here?
Well, I think people forget that county clerks are politicians, right? And they're at the front lines, maybe more than any other politicians at any level. They deal with the people, right? They deal with the people on voting issues. They deal with the people on marriage license issues. And this is a civil rights movement, right? And people can taste this thing. When that ruling came out, people could taste it. And so, I think it was a little bit of an opportunity for the county clerk to get political, which they just don't have that often. But I think it also needs to be noted that she wasn't the only county clerk who was inclined to do this either.
True. Well, let's get to it. Bob Beaupre was the last man standing in the Republican gubernatorial primary on Tuesday night. But most of the storylines were about relief expressed that Tom Tancredo didn't win the nomination. Beaupre just won just over 30% of the vote, eclipsing Tancredo at 26%. Lynn, you were right there in the middle of the battle. What did you make both of Beaupre's win, but also the reaction afterwards?
The relief?
Right.
The relief? I mean, I think there's Republicans that said, I'm not sure we can knock off Hickenlooper, but at least this doesn't damage Corey and the rest of the down ticket. What is really interesting to me, and I was on Backbone Radio and I said this the Sunday before the election, I had coffee or lunch with 4 Republicans in the week before the election. 3 were supporters for Mike Kopp, voted for him at the Assembly, donated. 1 was a supporter for Scott Gessler. And what all 4 had in common is they had voted for Beaupre. And I was like, so people, I mean, I was like, how can Beaupre not win when you have all these people who are for other people? I mean, I think there was effective outside ads. The Romney people who tried to pretend the Romney people weren't involved, but sent out a mailer, an attack mailer, and at the bottom it said, you are, that fine print, you are getting this because you signed on to the Romney campaign, whatever. I mean, Tom had it coming from every direction. Maybe it's the journalist in me. Would he have been that bad of a candidate? Would have been the nightmare they say? Some Republicans said yes. There was polling where crosstab shows that Republicans wouldn't vote for him. It would be a huge problem. I think the good thing that happens for Bob Beaupre is there's a lot of people going forward who don't remember or weren't here when there was the previous election. I mean, if you mention Bob standing at the end of the horse, they're like, what, when did that happen?
Good point.
That actually benefits him. Whereas Bob's gaffes are all the way back to 2006, and John Hickenlooper's gaffes are more like 2 weeks ago at the sheriff's thing. I think we'll see what happens in the fall. I mean, I think Republicans' biggest nightmare is, as we've said, waking up on November 5th and finding nothing's changed.
Right. David, both you and I have known Tom for a long time. He used to be here at the Colorado Inside Out table. Watching this campaign, while he seemed to enjoy it, it didn't seem like a boisterous campaign or that there was really a lot of energy and diehard desire. Maybe I was reading that wrong, but what did you make of the primary campaign?
Well, I think that's true for all 4 candidates, and actually it was all things considered, a pretty civil primary that, unlike some previous ones, didn't leave the winner fatally damaged, including the Beaupre's primary back in 2006. Lynn is certainly right about the conventional wisdom of journalists, the Democratic establishment, the Republican establishment, all of which thought that Tancredo would be a much weaker candidate than Beaupre. I don't agree with that, and I think actually a guy who is absolutely trusted by the voters to tell you what he thinks honestly, whether you agree with it or disagree with it, might be quite a strong contrast to the current incumbent. But that said, the out-of-state money that is interested in the U.S. Senate race and Cory Gardner, if Tancredo had won, they also had the conventional wisdom, so they would have stayed out of this and said, oh, Tancredo's going to drag everyone down to catastrophe, so we're going to give up on Gardner too. Now that they have Beaupre and feel confident at least, well, even if we lose, we'll only lose by a little bit. It's great news for all the commercial television stations. The money war will continue at even greater levels.
Eric, the reaction to the primary win was, well, again, felt like it was more about Tancredo losing the nomination instead of Beaupre. And I guess if I was Beaupre, I feel a little bit more like Charlie Brown, like not the councilman, but the cartoon character, because well, thank goodness the other guy didn't win. Whew. Okay, and be completely ignored. Maybe I'm reading into it. Maybe that was just the hype of the situation. What was your take?
Well, my take was I was one around this table a week ago that thought Tancredo was going to win. I believe, I'm not sure who else was there. I know Patty was. Patty had the good sense not to show up today to take her lumps. I'm here and have to take my lumps. I think the misnomer or the miscall was basically what was Tancredo's floor. And I was one who thought that his floor was closer to a third of the vote in a Republican primary that he would get just for being Tom Tancredo and just for showing up. It turns out in the final analysis that no, his floor was more like a quarter of the vote. He got elected to Congress way back when with 27% of the vote in a very fractured primary. Here he got, what did he get the other night? 26% of the vote. So that's basically Tom's number, and it hadn't changed over the 16 years since when he went to Congress and now this second campaign for governor. Beaupre ran a campaign. Tancredo did not. Campaigns do matter. And Republicans smell it this year. They taste it. They sniff it. They want victory. And they didn't want to do anything that damaged their prospects on down the line. Beaupre, I think, can keep it close. The difference between keeping it close and winning it, in my mind, is 3 things real quickly. One is he has to make his party, his support base believe that it's plausible, believe that he's not just a placeholder. They have to invest and invest with enthusiasm and money. Secondly, he probably needs another gaffe or two from John Hickenlooper. Yes, there was the one a couple weeks ago we've all talked about, but he needs some more help from Hickenlooper. Third, and in my mind most importantly, he needs a national gale force wind blowing in favor of Republicans. A breeze will not do it. He needs a gale force wind nationally. Lastly, thankfully, all the Democratic money that supported, that cheap and effort to promote Tancredo's candidacy, thankfully it didn't work because that was sleazy.
Susan, wrap it up for us.
I think we need to remember that early on, Tancredo said he was getting into the race to draw a viable candidate. Okay, I think we need to remember that this guy wasn't working that hard to get the job. And the image that stands out for me was on primary night, on election night. He's in an apron. I don't know what was under it. I think it was a T-shirt, maybe.
Nothing.
He's flipping hamburgers or hot
Carrying a
dogs
keto
on a grill, and this just does not look like a man who's really working to become governor
Right.
or really has the gravitas to become governor. And then he took it a step further when he called his dear friend Bob Beaupre and conceded in a phone call while flipping the burgers in front of a bunch of reporters. I mean, there was just a level of inauthenticity, I think, from start to finish on this. And in hindsight, it kind of boggles my mind that people really took him as seriously as they did.
With over 44% of the vote, Ken Buck easily outshined the other candidates in the 4th CD Republican primary. Since his three opponents attempted to be more conservative than Buck, some take his win as a good sign for the establishment wing of the GOP. David, what did you make? I mean, 44% is a big deal in a four-way race that, at least at this table last week, we thought would be a little closer.
Not everything fits into whatever the journalist narrative of, their particular 5 minutes is. The Tea Party's dead, the Tea Party rules all, establishment versus conservatives, all that. I think that the CD4 race is, first of all, Ken Buck has been a DA there for a long time. So he's been a candidate that has been running in a very large geographical part of that district, and Republicans have been used to voting for him a lot. Secondly, he ran a statewide campaign, both a very tough primary and also then the general election in 2010. So he has large area campaign experience, which none of his opponents did. He ran against a state senator who had his district, but was making a step up and running for something bigger. This was in a way easier for Buck to be running in a seventh of the state instead of all of it. And I attribute it to that. I would say this is one of the large litany of national and statewide races where Dudley Brown's candidate lost. I don't think he lost Scott Renfrew. I don't think Renfrew lost because Dudley endorsed him, but clearly Dudley's endorsement didn't help very much. Same in the governor's race, where first Dudley was for Greg Brophy, who I think would be a great governor, and Brophy didn't make the ballot even at the assembly, and then Dudley switched to Mike Kopp, who came in fourth. And in the U.S. Senate race, Dudley backed Randy Baumgardner, whose Senate campaign obviously is not proceeding. So Dudley's endorsement in major races doesn't seem to do people much good.
Eric, what did you make of Buck's big win? And was this basically the race for the 4th Congressional District? Can he breeze through November?
Yes, this is done. It's over. When the big switcheroo happened a few months ago with Cory exiting that race, Cory Gardner, and moving to the Senate race, and Buck moving over to the 4th CD race, I said at the time that I thought Ken Buck would be one of the big winners this year because I thought his ticket had been punched to Washington, where he missed the train. He had every chance to punch that ticket to Washington back in 2010, lost that race narrowly to Michael Bennet. And then this time around, he would have had a shot, but it was a long shot to win a Senate race against Mark Udall this year. Gardner clearly has somewhat of a better shot. So Ken Buck has a ticket punched to Washington, and we'll see what he does in Congress. I'm not one who necessarily thought this would be all that close. I wasn't all that surprised by the results of this race. Buck is the name brand candidate out there. Yes, there is a fertile environment these days, as we've seen in many other districts, many other states, for the insurgent, a la the Eric Cantor district, for the insurgent to do well. But that's when it's a one-on-one race. Here it was Buck against three people, so all the vote gets scattered, it gets diffused. Lastly, I would just point out the 4th CD has really become the bench for the Republican Party in this state. I mean, if you go back a while, that's where Bob Schaefer came from. Obviously, Cory Gardner is the golden boy who everyone on the Republican side is putting their hopes in right now. And we'll see if Ken Buck is the bench a few years down the road for whatever office opens up, but it wouldn't surprise me.
Didn't Hank Brown and come from it too?
Hank Brown and Wayne Allard are the obvious ones that I
Bill
missed.
Armstrong.
Yeah,
No,
wow.
Bill Armstrong was a
No.
different CD.
No, he was down. like
Arapahoe
the-
County, El Paso
right.
County.
Oh, still, at the very least, there's a long line of succession. This may not be the last stop for Ken Buck. Susan, what'd you make of the big win in CD4?
I think it was expected. I think it's interesting to call Ken Buck a kind of part of the establishment wing of the Republican Party. I mean, things have changed really in
would
our
have loved that
state.
title about 4 years ago,
Exactly,
yeah.
and so that's a huge transformation. I think this is about CD4 more than it's about anything, more statewide. And I think that's interesting largely because Cory Gardner, running for Senate, is coming out of that district. He's had to say, and he had positions that fit really well in that district, and is now going to have to kind of account for those positions now that he's running statewide.
Lynn, what do you think?
Well, I don't think it's any surprise at all, even though he had 3 worthy opponents. But when I did a story about CD4, I went back and looked at all the counties, those counties that are in there, all those rural counties. And Ken, in his Senate race, in his primary, and in his election in 2010, won almost all but just maybe 2 or 3 of those. Jane Norton won. So he'd already won those before. He'd already campaigned there before. He'd been campaigning for Senate this time. He had been there. And then you look, he's a very popular district attorney in Weld County, which is basically 1/3 of the district. The change in the district is with redistricting, it's now a huge chunk of Douglas County. I mean, it's weird when you think that Park Meadows Mall is in the 4th congressional district, and they don't have Larimer anymore. So
All the rural concerns of Park Meadows Mall.
exactly.
While the establishment wing of the GOP did well in big races, it failed in 2 key Jeffco State Senate primaries. Candidates supported by Rocky Mountain gun owners defeated more moderate Republicans in 2 Jeffco districts that many predict to be competitive in the fall. Eric, I blogged about this one because I realize that we have a competitive race for governor, a competitive race for Senate, but defeating any incumbent is difficult, whoever it is, whatever missteps have happened. Where the Republicans looked like they had at least the most realistic shot was the state Senate here in Colorado. There's 1 seat. All you have to do is win. There's some seats that have just switched over from Evie Hudak. This is one of them. And it seemed to me that they totally dropped the ball by letting 2 candidates that are arch conservative compared to their Republican opponents win these 2 races. Am I off my nut?
You're dead on correct.
Okay.
Speaking of dead on, some in the Republican Party, it strikes me, have a death wish.
Yeah.
They had every opportunity this year. It's going to be, if trends hold up, as good a Republican year as we've seen in a while, and that's on a national level. They had every opportunity to take back at least 1 chamber of the Colorado legislature, and the most likely chamber being the state Senate, because as you point out, there was a 1-vote difference. The key district was probably that Westminster district, the Evie Hudak district, now represented by Rachel Zenzinger. It was a flip-em kind of district with the right Republican candidate. But once again, as the Republicans have done time after time over a decade or more, they went for the wrong candidate. There is conservative, and then there's crazy. And in this case, they have marched over the line. It is not the only one. In Colorado Springs, in a state house race down there, they nominated some guy named, I think, Gordon Kleinschmidt or something, which is probably going to become a name we bandy about around this table pretty frequently over the next couple of years, because he crosses over that line from conservative to crazy. And it's maybe a Democrat would have a chance down there, but it's a pretty traditionally Republican district down there. So he's likely to be a state representative come next January. It'd be good stuff for us to talk about. It is hard to see how the Republicans take over the state Senate without at least one of those Jeffco districts. The Andy Kerr district was always going to be harder, and Sanchez, in my mind, is not going to beat Andy Kerr. But this woman, Laura Woods, Lang Sias would have been a perfect candidate to possibly win that seat back. Laura Woods is not going to win that seat back, and it is hard to do the math to figure out where else it comes from. if you do a list of who are the key people who turned around this state for Democrats over the last 10 or 12 years, you could throw a lot of names on there, from John Hickenlooper, Michael Bennett, Mark Udall, Ken Salazar. You could do the funders like Jared Polis or Tim Gill or Pat Stryker. I would argue that all of them pale in comparison to one name. That name being somebody that David has brought up previously. It's Dudley Brown. Dudley Brown is the single person most responsible in this state for the Democratic resurgence and dominance over the last decade.
Susan, when the Colorado Democrats get together sometime soon, is their person of the year Dudley Brown?
It may be, because what Dudley Brown has kind of managed to define himself on the gun issue. And now we're starting to see these other kind of issues come up. I mean, there was a gay baiting ad associated with him. Suddenly, the discourse is not just about guns, it's about a much broader menu of issues. And yeah, you know, I think there are plenty of independents and plenty of Republicans who might not agree with some of his tactics.
Lynn, what do you think?
Well, I disagree with you that it's suddenly. He's done this all along. He did this in 10 with the, remember he used the gay New Jersey couple, the kissing.
couple.
I forgot about that. He was
Yeah,
behind
I mean,
that.
that's kind of the myth that Dudley Brown is about guns. It's not. It's just as much as about social
They should change their
issues.
name.
Well, he's got all those behind-the-scenes people helping him, the Hotelling brothers and that sort of thing. It's about social issues. He was, when B.J. Nickel voted for the Civil Unions Bill in 2012 and got it out of committee, that he did attack flyers at her church parking lot. It's been that way all along. Lang Sias is one of the most amazing people I have ever covered in my entire political career. He ran for Congress in 2010, and I thought, wow, this guy's amazing. Because of some false attack on him, he had to release his military records. He was a Top Gun pilot and instructor. I mean, it was almost like his mother had written it. It was the most glowing thing you've ever read. I mean, he's got character up the wazoo, and then he's running against this woman who has 2 last names, who said, well, I had to use a fake name during the recall because of what happened in Pueblo. So he said, what happened in Pueblo? And she couldn't answer it. He asked people, what happened in Pueblo that she had to use a different last name? I mean, and here's the other thing for Republicans. Had they gotten off their duffs in 2012, they blamed the Libertarian, but Lang only lost by 600 votes. Maybe if Dudley had put in that effort into getting a Republican elected, they wouldn't have these gun bills go through. I mean, to me, it's just insane. There's 5 key Senate races that will decide who controls the Senate after November. I think the House was so gerrymandered, it's out of play. And literally, the circular firing squad, I mean, it is true that Dudley's about guns because he is the leader of the circular firing squad in this. It's just outrageous.
David, wrap it up for us.
As if Dudley had anything to do with helping people, pro-gun candidates, win general elections. His shtick is finding who will be the most completely submissive to him, and then backing that candidate and lying to the general electorate about the other side. For example, in the Lang Sias, a pro-business Republican, got a contribution from a pro-business organization. One of the many people who is on the board of this pro-business organization is Tim Gill. This organization is not something about gay rights, it's about business.
Right.
And so they gave the money to the most electable pro-business candidate. Dudley comes out with this ad as Lang Sias is this like little dancing monkey to Tim Gill's radical homosexual agenda. And it's like the case a couple elections ago where Dudley stole illegally a photo of some people getting 2 gay men getting married in New Jersey and said, oh, this is the agenda for this candidate I don't like. Well, the candidate he didn't like happened to be opposed to civil unions, let alone gay marriage, let alone people from New Jersey kissing in front of the Rocky Mountains in the fake Photoshop thing he did. I will say, you can't say this whole thing is about Dudley, though. In the Tony Sanchez versus Mario Nicolas race, Tony went out and worked door to door. Mario is a busy practicing lawyer. He didn't have time to get out as much. So that was just something where the guy who can put the most time into the campaign is often the winner.
Gotcha. Well, let's quickly get to our favorite part of the show, Disgrace of the Week. Lynn, start us off.
Wow, was
I
that
know,
quick? Did we miss?
we
I'm
went
like,
through
wait,
it
don't we have
crazy,
more
yeah.
than me? I say this every time, but it's people who did not vote. I don't care if you say there was no contested races in mine. This is such a right that you need to do it.
I agree. David.
President Obama, just look at where we are standing in the world and look at how he's so much like Bush, but even worse. This week, another 9-0 Supreme Court, two more 9-0 Supreme Court decisions against the radical extremist proto-totalitarian agenda he has, which includes the court rejected his idea that if the cops arrest you for an unpaid traffic ticket, they can search your entire cell phone without a search warrant.
Eric.
The fractivist Philip Doe, who went on an attack in the Loveland election this past week against B.J. Nickel, a name that Lynn just mentioned in a completely different context, compared her to a Nazi, compared her to Joseph Goebbels. I've moderated a debate with Philip Doe. If anyone is fact challenged, he might want to hold up a mirror. But you can disagree in this game without being totally uncivil. When you have to play the Nazi card, it usually means you're losing.
Susan.
Mayor Michael Hancock, this week, like we've had in weeks and months in the past, problems, new problems, old problems, resurfacing in the Denver Sheriff's Department, and he is nowhere to be found on them. He doesn't speak publicly on them. It's as if he's pretending they're not happening.
Very, very quickly say something nice about somebody.
I'm going to actually laud the three Republicans who lost for governor, because they did very publicly say that I am going to go out and campaign for Beaupre. And I mean, I think it was killing them inside, all of them. And I know this very well, but they said it, and actually they all meant it.
David.
CU Buffalo's basketball player Spencer Dinwiddie, who was drafted by the Detroit Pistons of the NBA.
Eric.
I recently announced a professional transition, and just everyone at SC2, my shop for the last couple decades that I've been privileged to work with, and a lot of the talent that we've nurtured and grown, and we'll still do some work together.
Here.
U.S. District Judge Marcia Krieger, who was appointed by George Bush, who is a gun owner, who I think made a very reasonable decision on guns.
And as we leave tonight, I want to send one more say something nice about somebody. We lost this last weekend, one of our dear friends here at CIO, at Colorado Inside Out, Susie Aikman, longtime floor director and friend of the station. She liked to tell people that she discovered me, and I'm not really sure there was much to discover, but I do owe the very beginning of my television career to her. When I was looking for a spot just to start a TV career, I looked for any place that would take on a non-student intern. Channel 12 let me answer the phones on a pledge drive, and during a break on the pledge drive, I was talking to people about what I wanted to do, and Susie said, well, you know we take volunteers in the crew, don't you? I said, well, no, of course not. She showed me the sign-up sheet. I signed up for a shift, and the very next week I met the person who actually created this show, Barbara Jabali, and she said, well, I need an intern. How about you work for me? And that was 18 years ago in April. I am grateful for the start of my career that I owe to Susie and her stepping in. That was her way, always supporting us and taking care of us. If you're a friend of Susie, you want to go to her memorial, it's going to be Thursday, July 3rd at 10 a.m. at United Methodist on the corner of 38th and Wadsworth. For our viewers watching our live stream right now, stay tuned for a special behind-the-scenes segment. And for our broadcast viewers, we'll see you next week. For everyone here at Channel 12, I'm Dominic Dezzutti. Thanks for watching. Good night.